Your Honour, I understand from my learned friend Mr. Gray that Bishop Finnegan is not required. Before I recall Father McKinnon, if I can just deal with a few housekeeping issues quickly. The first is this, is that the statement of BWM, I think Your Honour may have marked Exhibit 28-107, but I'm not sure that that was captured on the record. So if I can
I've marked it 28-107.
So if we can confirm that that's then tendered and marked that. And then secondly, my learned friend Mr. O'Brien indicated that there were a number of documents from the Father Pickering tender bundle in case study 35, the Melbourne Archdiocese case study, that he wished to have tendered. Those have been pared down. They still bear the tab numbers that they have in the tender bundle in the other case study. But if I can tender them in this case study, and what I propose to do is to hand up an index of those documents.
So what you're doing is tendering the documents in the index, is that right?
That is so, Your Honour.
Very well.
And then...
just a minute. Do we need to mark the documents in this case study?
Yes, Your Honour.
So I should mark the documents identified in the index as together Exhibit 28-112. Is that what you want?
Yes, Your Honour. And then finally, yesterday during the examination of Father Finnegan, my learned friend Mr. O'Brien referred to a couple of documents relating to Paul David Ryan, and I tender those in a small bundle.
Those documents will together be Exhibit 28-113.
As Your Honour pleases, I recall Father McKinnon. Father, yesterday when your evidence was interrupted, we were talking about Paul David Ryan. So if I can pick it up where we were on that occasion, and in particular refer you to tab 76 in the Ryan tender bundle, which will come up in front of you. Now, you'll recall where we got up to is that Father Ryan had resigned from the Penshurst parish in May of 1991. And if we take a look at this minute, it's a minute of the consultors on 19 February 1991, and you'll see you recorded as present.
I've got minutes of the 19th of December.
Yes. And Father, you see that you are recorded as having been present at that meeting?
Yes, certainly.
Yes, and if we scroll down to the heading Staffing, where it says Father P.D. Ryan has returned to Australia, and the Bishop reported that Father Ryan is available for replacement. Now, firstly, you of course knew that Father Ryan was out of Australia.
I probably did. I'm not sure, but I probably did.
Well, if not...
I didn't know much about his moves at any stage, but I probably knew he was out of Australia.
Well, if not before, certainly at this meeting, you must have deduced that he was out of Australia if the Bishop said he was returning to Australia.
Sure.
Yes. Do you know whether you knew why he was out of Australia, or where he was, or what he was doing?
I don't recall, but I'd be surprised if I did.
we look at tab 78, you'll see this is a letter, 29 January 1992, and it's from Bishop Malkerns, and it's addressed to someone in Gemmas Springs, New Mexico. I don't expect you saw this letter at the time, did you?
No.
But if I can show you page 3 of that letter. The paragraph beginning, however, an unfortunate complication arose. That's now at the top of your screen. Do you see that? And it arose in the last couple of weeks. And the bishop said there was a newspaper coverage of the trial of a childcare worker who was accused of paedophilia. And the barrister for the defense made the claim in court that the accused, when 14, had confessed to a priest that he was attracted to boys. And the priest told him not to worry, and so on, including that the priest got into the bath and invited the accused into the bath and molested him. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, do you recall seeing or hearing about a newspaper article in early or mid-January 1992 to that effect?
No, I don't.
But by then, I suppose, Father, it was reasonably well known that Ryan had had problems with offending against children.
I'm not sure how commonly known it was, but it doesn't seem to be in my memory. But I may have known, but I don't remember that I knew.
So if indeed there was an article to this effect, you would accept that that would have been a source of much gossip and talk amongst the priests?
There'd probably be enough for it anyhow, I would think.
Yes. And then at...
Oh, hang on. The priest was not named in his newspaper report. I don't know whether fellows who knew the poor Ryan better or lived down that area might have known who he was.
Of course, if the priest wasn't named, that would particularly invite speculation and discussion about who it might be.
I presume it would have, but I don't remember it. I can't remember even whether we talked about it in the consultants. Well, I don't suppose we'd had a meeting at this stage since this had happened.
Well, the meeting, or at least a meeting, there may have been others in between. I'll show you tab 81.
Just before you do that, is it right to think that if a story like this turns up in a newspaper about a priest, it becomes a matter of intense interest for all priests?
It may depend on what newspaper. Would it have been the Warrnambool newspaper, or is it a national newspaper, metropolitan newspaper?
Does it matter? I mean, I just think of my own profession. If you start having a story like this,
yes,
it would go through the profession like wildfire. Now,
well,
what about the priesthood?
We didn't have any sort of organised network.
No, all you need is the telephone.
Yeah, that's right. But if you're up in your presbytery by yourself, you may not hear it. You may not, unless you've got someone who in a sense you're on the network with, and not everyone had a contact like that.
So some priests are working in complete isolation.
I wouldn't say complete, but reasonable isolation, yes. Yeah. I don't think that, yes, I'd say that there are some who are much more gregarious and would talk on the telephone much more frequently, and others who aren't telephone people at all.
Well,
so it's a bit mixed.
If a story turns up and the priest isn't named,
yeah.
Again, thinking of where I come from, that would lead to intense speculation about who it might be.
I presume so. I don't remember it happening.
No.
Doesn't mean it doesn't. I just don't remember.
Yeah, okay.
Father, if I can show you tab 81, that's before you there, you'll see that's the minute of a meeting on 1 December 1992. So that's now at the end of the same year. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you recorded as being present.
Yes.
And you'll see just below halfway on the page, it says Bishop Malkerns mentioned that father, and it's got the redaction BPB, and PD Ryan will not be involved in diocesan placements in 1993. And the bishop then proceeded to outline available information regarding clergy preferences and so on. Now, are you able to recall, Father, the circumstances in which it was mentioned that PD Ryan would not be involved in diocesan placements in 1993?
No, I can't help you on that. Can't remember.
And typically, I suppose, if a priest was not to be involved in placements in a particular year, that might be because, to offer one reason, he was going to study.
I don't even know whether that would have been assumed, but he was someone who was sort of there and then he wasn't there and then he was back and all that sort of stuff. So.
Well, leaving Ryan to one side and talking generally, typically, if it was announced that a priest was not going to be available for diocesan placements for a year or a period of time, I suppose that might be because he was going to study. Would that be right?
I could be that.
And
certainly could be that.
And that would...
But it'd be talked about if it were. I think be mentioned in the minutes or something.
Yes. Well, we've seen that. So generally it would be so-and-so has asked
study leave.
For study leave, and there's a discussion and it's
going off or something.
Granted or not granted, as the case may be. Is that right?
Yes.
Or possibly if someone was ill and recuperating.
Yeah, that could be the case. Although, I suppose you could still resign your parish or whatever. But yes, those things would have been, they'd have been mentioned. And
yes, and then...
And sometimes just accepted, that's the fact, so we don't discuss it anymore.
But I suppose in such a case, the bishop would at least say, well, so-and-so's ill or recovering, not necessarily going into the medical details.
I'd expect so.
And then the consultors would know, at least broadly speaking, why he was not available.
I would say so.
And now, in this case, we deduce, one can see from the record, in fact, that Ryan was not available because these complaints had been made against him, and the bishop was therefore not making him available. One would expect, would one not, that there would be a question from the consultors as to why he's not available.
Yes, I'd expect that.
And
yes, I'd expect that, or at least if we didn't ask it, we should have wondered it, and we should have asked it.
Now, and in those circumstances, would Bishop Malkerns not have given at least some indication, if not the full detail?
I'm not sure. He was very reluctant to mention, as far as I know, the pedophilia of a priest. He just didn't do it, unless it was public knowledge. Then we'd talk about it. But it's...
So if he said nothing would that, about the reason, and merely said, as what's recorded there, he mentioned that Father Ryan would not be involved in diocesan placements in 1993, would that not itself then be a signal to the consultors that there's some problem here of a nature that the bishop doesn't want to talk about it?
I would say so. And I would think that could well be.
That would be...
It tended to be his, not that these things came up at every meeting, but it tended to be his general approach to things, that he had I don't know, an enormous, whether you'd say respect or something or other, I don't know, for privacy, for confidentiality. And whereas, it's a good thing in some ways that a man's reputation was safe, there are times when it becomes a vice, I think. And I don't know, I just think that again, I don't want to be blaming everything back to what I was talking about yesterday, but I think it's so easy, and it's particularly in an institution, but even individually, I think, for what in itself can be good to become destructive. And that, normally, I suppose, a degree of respect for a person's reputation is good, but there comes a stage when it's destructive. It's not just respect for confidentiality, it becomes sort of potential cover-up or potential absence of information that we should have had.
Father, that's...
you give the impression that if there'd been an innocent explanation, he is going overseas for study leave or some similar,
yes,
then the bishop would have talked about it.
He'd have talked about it, or we might have, or we just again perhaps would take it in our stride, but we at least know about it.
Yeah, but if there's a sinister explanation, what you're saying is the bishop didn't talk about it.
That would be the way you define it, I think, yeah.
Now, in terms of sinister explanations, one of them, I assume, is problems with alcohol.
It could be some problem like that.
Another one would be fingers in the till.
Yes.
And a third one would be sexual impropriety.
I would say those would be
now,
reasons, yeah.
Many priests who've had sexual relations with adults, as I understand it, have continued to do work as a parish priest.
Yeah.
But when it was involving children, there was a bigger problem. Is that right?
There should have been a problem if there wasn't.
Well, when we have the bishop not providing an explanation,
yeah,
is there anything else we can think of that could be the reason? Alcohol, money, fingers in the till, or abusing children?
I'd say those are just about it.
So everyone at this meeting, if they weren't told anything, would have had a very limited range to choose from as to the reason.
Yeah, and I doubt if they would have suspected alcohol, because I'm not sure that he had any reputation for drinking inappropriately.
Well, I was going to say, you would all know about someone's drinking habit.
Well, I think we normally would.
You normally would, because you'd have, on occasions, you'd have meals together and there'd be alcohol. Would you know if someone had their fingers in the till?
I don't think we know unless the bishop told us.
Right. So that and maybe...
Because unless people in the parish itself got suspicious, but sometimes the priest looked after the books and no one else saw them. So lay people may not have been up with what was happening.
But then the bishop may not have known either if no one else...
Well, for a while, well, that's true, I suppose. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what the business manager would be, whether he could sort of detect things like that. I don't know or suspect.
But again, when we start to talk these through, you end up at the sexual misconduct issue as looming large as the reason why, absent an explanation.
I would say so.
Yeah. And everyone at this meeting would have had the sort of understanding you had about those issues, I assume.
I may have had. I'm not sure. I don't know. I just don't know. I may have had. We may not have talked about it, but I don't think that excuses it. As I look back now, I think it's...
All we're getting to is you may not have...
It was over loyal. It was sort of loyalty becomes
I understand.
something else. I just...
But where we've got to is you may not have talked about it, but you probably didn't need to because everyone actually knew.
Yes, as I say, I'm not confident enough to say a definite yes to that.
Yeah.
Father, in the context of the article, albeit there's a limited amount we know about it, but in the context of the article in January of that year and time, nearly a year having passed, sufficient for that.
I think you're right. I hadn't thought of that when I was talking to His Honour. Yeah, I'd imagine by that stage people knew, and I would have known in that case too.
Yeah. If I can show you tab 88. You'll see this is the meeting of the consultants on 8 June 1993. Do you see that?
Yes.
And do you see that you recorded as having been present?
Yes.
And if I show you over the page, near the top of the page, it says Father P.D. Ryan has had all his faculties revoked,
No, oh, yeah, sorry, I've got it, yes. Yes.
with the exception of being able to celebrate Mass privately without giving any appearance of having an ecclesiastical appointment or office. The bishop explained to the consultors the reasons for this course of action. So obviously the bishop did explain the reasons.
He must have. It says so here, yes.
Yes. And do you recollect what reasons were given?
No, but I imagine it's obvious.
Yes, it's obvious by then, isn't it?
I would think so.
It's because of all the complaints that had come in about
Yeah.
Ryan by that time about offending against children.
Well, again, my mind doesn't hold those things, but there was the newspaper article, there were other things. I would say that there would have been any doubt about what he was talking about.
Yes. Father, now I'd like to just address a few issues in relation to Father BPB. Do you know who it is whom I'm referring to?
No?
That pseudonym list should assist you.
It'll be on this list somewhere, will it?
It's about the 6th or 8th name down from the top on the left-hand side.
BPB, yes.
Yes, so you know who that person is?
Yes, my word, yep,
Formerly a priest of the diocese?
that's right.
Yes. And so between you and I, we will do our best to avoid mentioning his name as I asked you a few questions about him.
Sure.
Yes. When is it that you first found out or heard about his offending sexually against children?
Now, again, I'm not sure, but there was something had happened. I remember Father John Martin, I think, yes, he'd be mentioned as one of the members of the consultants, I think, was he? J. Martin? Mine gone off. Doesn't matter much. I think he was a consultant. I lived in his house while I was working full-time. And I remember on one occasion, he said to me that a woman of the neighbouring parish, where BPV or something was, BPB was uneasy about the priest's behaviour. She said he would come to the house when the boys were home, he'd go to the bedroom, and she wasn't sure what happened there. But she said that, now, I'm pretty sure at that time that she said to him, she'd asked the boys and nothing, and they said nothing had happened. But nevertheless, she was most uneasy about it and mentioned it to him. Now, the thing I'm uncertain of was whether he told it to me straight away or whether it was sometime afterwards. I don't know. But I do remember his saying that. And it just happened that coincidentally, I know the woman, and she was talking about it. And then, this was just probably about a month ago or so,
Perhaps sometime in the mid-1990s, but you're not able to be more certain than that, or am I already suggesting something more certain than you're able to be?
I just can't be certain at all. I just know that it was I'm pretty sure it was while I was living there. It would have been while I was living there in the house.
Yes, perhaps we leave that at that for a moment. I can show you in the Father BPB Tender Bundle tab 5. You will see here the priest whom you mentioned, Father Martin, is reflected as having been a consultor at that time.
Yes.
And this is July 1989, and you reflected there as well. Do you see that?
Yes.
And if I show you over the page, at least on page 3, you see it says the priest, the parish of, and it's redacted,
Whatever it was, yeah.
became vacant following the resignation of Reverend BPB.
Yeah.
And the name of that parish I'm going to show you now, Father.
I know it. I'd know what it'd be.
Well, just
Yes,
to check you and I are on the same page.
Yep.
Yes, now you see that that was announced in July of 1989. And so your understanding would be, in the way in which you described it earlier, is that it was perhaps shortly before this time that the report was made to Reverend Martin.
Yes.
And you're not sure when Reverend Martin made the report to you?
No.
Would
It may have been after this, but I'm not sure.
Or even at the time of this meeting?
It could have been after the woman had spoken to him, or it could be after this meeting.
Yes.
Yep.
And if I can ask that you be shown your CV,
Yep.
so you can just be clear on where you were at any particular time.
This year is 98, 92, is it?
July 1989.
Yep, 89. Yep.
You can scroll down a bit. Because do you recall which parish you were in at that time?
89, I'd imagine I was in Warwick-Nabil. Well, if I was in a parish, I mightn't have been there yet.
It seems to be in the period you were the director of the ministry.
Yes, but I
priest program.
was that still for a couple of years while I was in Warwick-Nabil too. But, and possibly if I was having a meeting in Ballarat, occasionally I might stay with Father Martin if I was staying overnight. But beyond that, I don't know. It could have been, if I knew the year I went, but 92 I went to Warwick-Nabil, was it? Oh yeah. So, sorry. If it was 92 that I went to Warwick-Nabil, I'd have been living in Ballarat when this was happening. 89, I'd have been in Ballarat.
Okay. Father, if I can take you back to the minute, page 3 of the minute of 1989, July 1989. So, looking at that minute and it being reflected that Father BPB had resigned from the parish in question, and you know which parish that is.
I do, yeah.
At that time, did you know what it was that led to his resignation?
No, I don't. In fact, I've got a vague memory, and I'm not totally sure of it, but I've got the memory, I think, that I offered to fill in at that parish on the next weekend because there was no, Father Bulldog wouldn't have been there at that stage, and there was no one available to celebrate Mass. Now, I've got an idea I filled in, and I've still got the sort of feeling that I didn't know what it was for. I think I either said to the people or someone asked me after Mass or something like that, but I've got a bit of a memory of saying, I don't know what it is, whether he's had burnout or what. But my memory doesn't seem to be that I knew he had been accused of pedophilia. So,
Well, Father, perhaps we can...
I don't rely on that memory, but I think it's right.
Perhaps we can move on and then seek to identify when that may have been. If I can show you tab 7. You'll see we now March 1990. Do you see that?
Yes.
And you are recorded as present.
Yes.
And over the page, it's recorded that Father BPB was appointed assistant priest effective 31 March 1990 in another parish.
Yes.
Do you have any recollection about that?
I'm not sure whether I remember it at that time or whether it's something that I've spoken about in between, but I know that's, not that I remember dates in my head, but I know that he was appointed assistant priest to a certain parish.
Yes, and at that meeting, was there any explanation given by the bishop with regard to the treatment that he had undergone?
I'm not sure on that. I don't even know if he had treatment, so I don't know on that.
Yes, and if I can show you tab 9.
I'm not even sure we would have been told beforehand that he was having treatment. We might have. But anyhow, I don't remember.
You'll see in September of 1992, there was a meeting. Again, you recorded as present. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And halfway down the page, it says the assistant priest is now vacant, and this needs to be addressed, and that's in that parish. Do you recall that having occurred?
No, I don't. I'm sorry about that, but I don't.
And then finally, Father, on these documents, I take you to the minute we looked at earlier in relation to Father Ryan. That's at tab 10. Sorry, it's the BPB tender bundle, tab 10. You'll see it's the minute we looked at before, 1 December 1992, and you recorded as present. If we scroll down a little below halfway, it's where it says Bishop Malkerns mentioned that Father BPB and Father Ryan will not be involved in diocesan placements in 1983, and you asked various questions about the reasons why a priest may not be involved in diocesan placements, and I take it that your answers apply generally and therefore equally in relation to BPB.
I would say by 1993, I probably knew quite clearly what the problem was with Father BPB.
Yeah, so this is December 1992. Do you have known by then?
A couple of years even after the move from the
Yes.
parish area as parish priest.
Yes.
I'd say by then we'd have known, or I'd have known, or Father Martin would have told me. Anyhow, I'd know one way or the other, I think. If he told me, I'd imagine he would have told me before this.
Yes.
That time, yeah, I just don't know.
Father, have you maintained contact with Bishop Malkerns?
Yes.
And have you discussed this period with him at all, and the question of the movement of these priests around from parish to parish?
No. It's only been probably in the last year or two that I've, as it were, re-established the practice of visiting him from time to time. And his memory is worse than mine, much worse. So it was useless doing it. We didn't talk about it.
Do you have a not? Well, I withdraw that. Do you not have a sense then on what his reflections are now over this period?
Yes, we didn't talk much about it, but it's the sort of thing you couldn't. Well, not this specifically this period, but just the record of the past, and he says he struggles to sleep. He struggled, which probably still struggles to sleep of a night. So these things now are on his mind. But beyond that, well, there wasn't much more we could say. He didn't remember details, but he was profoundly sorry for what he'd done, for his. Yeah, what he hadn't done, I suppose, is more like it. Yeah.
Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Does anyone else have any questions?
Yes, I do.
Anyone else? Very well.
Brother McKinnon Seckle is my name. Amongst other victims, I appear on behalf of Helen Watson. I'd just like to take you, please, to evidence you
Mr. Seckle, just make sure that microphone's going to pick you up.
I'd just like to take you to evidence you gave to the Commission yesterday, please, Father, and more particularly at page 14733, and that will appear before you in a moment, please. In particular, you're asked questions commencing at line 11.
Nothing has come up yet. Here we are.
And you'll see there at line 11, you're asked as follows. Father, are you able to identify when it was that you first heard that there were allegations or complaints about Ryan offending against young men or adolescents or being involved sexually with them? Your answer, I don't remember when. I would have heard, but I think when I would have heard, I wouldn't have been surprised. Just not because I knew anything, but because I just somehow or other, I didn't like him and thought that might be why, well, that, I don't know, personality stuff, something or other. If I can just ask you, your reference to not being surprised as a consequence of personality stuff and the other, what was that to which you refer? What was it about his personality that led you not to be surprised?
It, in a sense, was intuitive as much as anything, I think. I noticed Father McDermott yesterday said he seemed to be someone who saw himself as superior to the other priests, and
Yes.
that I would have probably picked up that sort of stuff and
Yes.
reacted unfavourably in my own self too.
Yes.
I don't know, beyond that there was a certain sort of unreality about him, I
Yes.
thought. Living in another world, his own world.
But in
I
relation...
don't know. You know, in terms of his not being surprised, it'd be true, I wouldn't have been surprised. But what would have triggered that, I don't know whether you call it suspicion or what.
Yes.
I don't know.
But was it something about his behaviour or mannerisms or the way he conducted himself?
Mannerism, like a way of conducting himself. I didn't know him well. I hardly ever met him, so they were, you know, that have been very general impressions. But I suppose, I don't know, but I can sometimes do that. Just sum up a person in a moment, and could be quite wrong, but I do it. And
Yes.
I just had that sort of attitude. For some reason or other, I didn't like him. and I didn't know him. So I didn't know even what Father McDermott was talking about. But that you could pick that up in his attitude. I think, I don't know, the way he bore himself. I don't know what it was.
Yes. And was that impression of him that you had, to your knowledge, shared by others at the time?
Whether the precise content of it was the same thing, but I'd say he wouldn't have been liked by very many of the fellows at all. That'd be my impression.
And
he was
why
very
would...
much a loner and...
Yes.
See,
and why
thing...
would that have been?
Huh?
And why would that have been?
I don't know. In my experience, I seem to think of him only as being down the area of Warrnambool. And for some reason or other, I've never worked in that area. I've never been particularly sort of involved in it. So he was almost sort of... I didn't see much of him and didn't know much of him, and it was a sort of world that wasn't my world. So I really didn't know him. But what the other priests felt about him, whether I picked it up from things they'd said or not, I have the impression myself that they didn't like him, and I'd be surprised if he would have had any real friends within the diocese at all.
Yes. And were there any concerns either you had or were expressed to you by other priests as to his conduct and behaviour?
Not early on.
Yes. Well, when were you first aware of concerns, either yourself or by other priests within the diocese?
I don't know. I think it might have been the consultors meeting that was one of those consultors meetings we've referred to.
Yes, and do you recall which consultors meeting it was, or when, and what year it was?
Probably, I don't know. No, I can't answer that.
Yes, and well, when it was
just
raised...
dates become just like minestrone and
yes.
I must say.
But you do have a recollection of it being, or concerns being raised at a consultants meeting, do you?
I think this here was referring almost to... Was this referring to a consultants meeting?
Yes, well, it was raised, if I can describe it, at the last meeting. That is a meeting where Bishop Mulcairns provided explanation as to Father Ryan's behaviour. But I'm asking you, do you have a recollection of there being concerns raised as to Father Ryan's behaviour prior to that explanation?
I can't answer that. I don't know. I don't know.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you. Father McKinnon, I represent BPD, and I'm just going to follow on some brief questions on Paul David Ryan. You were a parish priest at Beaufort from 1971 to 1976.
That's right.
And that was your first appointment as a parish priest?
Yes.
Do you recall Paul David Ryan during that period, noting, as I understand it, he was at St Columba's in Ballarat North in around 74, 75?
I don't recall it.
You don't recall meeting him or his reputation?
No. When I say I don't recall anything about his reputation, the only thing I'd be thinking of, if I had heard anything, it'd be about his, I don't know, his, not his sexual behaviour, but just his general way of looking at priests and relating to them.
Well, you said yesterday you took an instinct of dislike, and I think you've touched upon those matters today.
Sorry,
You said yesterday an instinct of dislike of him. So it was a personality alarm bell, if it was in terms of his personality, was it?
I might have to get earphones. I can't understand. Would that be possible?
I'm happy to move on briefly to another.
Sorry, I just...
Well, no, they're coming.
Okay.
Try again, Mr. O'Brien.
Yes, you said yesterday at transcript 14732, when did you, in answer to the question, when did you first know Ryan? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
You said, again, I've got no idea, I don't know. I suppose I knew him when he first came to the diocese. And that's why I was wondering about
Yes.
that time when you were in Beaufort.
I must say what I was thinking was that Warrnambool was the sort of the locus where I seem to have him in my head. I don't remember. Hang on now, St Columba's, Ballarat North. Was he there before he was ordained?
He was there as a 3-month probationary period at St Columba's in around 1974, 1975, I believe, before he was ordained, yes.
Because I have a slight memory of Father Boylan, who was the priest at that time, occasionally being asked to, I suppose, give someone a bit of experience and to observe how he handled things. And I was a friend of Father Boylan's, so it wouldn't surprise me if I knew that Ryan was there. I'd forgotten that.
And that may have been when you started to gain this impression, which you described like an instinctive dislike.
I'm not sure whether I would have known him enough then. I may not even have known him. It may have just been that Father Boylan spoke to him. Not specifically about him, but...
Thank you for trying. Just another matter. Were you aware of Father Ron Pickering?
Yeah, I am a bit, in that I studied in Rome, and I think it was in my second year Pickering came to Rome from England and would have joined our year. So I knew him.
And when you say knew him, what did you know about him?
I have the feeling he may have been an Anglican priest beforehand. Certainly was an Anglican. Beyond that, I knew nothing much about him, just what we pick up by being in the same year. The college where I was an international college, and we were sort of organised in a way that a group of about 30 students would be living in a particular area. We used to call it a camerata. And the idea of that was to mix the nationalities. So it was within the camerata that we made most of our contacts. But there would be occasions during the week, after a midday meal, for example, where the Australian students would gather for half an hour and talk. So I presume he would have come to those, yeah.
When did you first become aware of his relationship with Paul David Ryan?
No idea. I think it was only reading some of the reports before coming here.
And what about Father Pickering's paedophilia issues?
No, I didn't know. Again, though, in lots of ways, I suppose he sort of made a similar impression on me as Paul David Ryan did. For somehow, a reason or other, I didn't like him.
And what about...
Well,
yeah, continue.
You know, he'd behave in a kind of, I don't know, a feat kind of way. And yes, I didn't like him.
Were you aware of allegations that he had young boys and young men hanging around his presbytery?
No, when I heard those, and it would have been within the last couple of years, I think I heard that within the last couple of years. May have been at the start of the Victorian inquiry, or not, I'm not sure. No, it was all news to me. But again, you know, it doesn't say much about me, but I wasn't surprised.
And finally, your relationship between Bishop Mulcairns and Father Pickering, were you aware of that?
No.
And none in your recent discussions with with Bishop Mulcairns?
No, not at all. I'd be surprised that he would have had... Well, he might have had something to do with him, because Pickering came back before I came back to Australia, and he was ordained for Melbourne, and I think either Ron Mulcairns had just been ordained, Yes, would have been ordained. So they may have known each other as junior priests, but I'm not sure where either of them was posted and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know. I had no sense of there being friends.
I won't take you to correspondence, but there's correspondence that I could ask you to look at sometime. Thank you, Father.
Good.
Mr. Stewart.
I have nothing further for the Father.
Thank you, Father. That concludes your evidence. You may step down. You're excused.
Thank you. Just one little point. On some of that stuff that I was talking about yesterday, I wrote a little booklet for the Centre for Human Development, or whatever we call it, Institute for Ministry. And I just wondered whether it gives a few of the facts and figures. It's only a kind of digest of them. Would that be of any assistance to the Commission?
We'd like to see. Do you have a copy with you?
I haven't got one with me, but I can locate one. I may even have one personally. If I haven't got it personally, I've got a hard copy. I've got the text of it on my computer.
We'd like to see it. One of the staff will speak to you about that.
I just think it could be relevant.
Well, it could be of general relevance, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Father.
Good.
Your Honour, I call John Thomas Walsh.
Will you take an oath on the Bible? Yes. Would you repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
The evidence that I shall give in this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Nothing but the truth.
Yes, thank you. Take a seat, please.
Father, will you state your full names
John Thomas Walsh,
and your current occupation?
parish priest of the Catholic parish of Mentone, Parkdale,
And that's in the Archdiocese of Melbourne.
Archdiocese of Melbourne.
I ask that you are shown your statement dated 5 December 2015, which is Exhibit 28-87. Can you take a look at that statement? And in particular, I'll show you this bottom of the page. That's your signature, I take it, Father?
It is, yes.
And I'll show you the next page. And that's your signature too, I take it?
It is.
And I see that it's witnessed by Christopher
Trichillis.
Trichillis. And who's Christopher Trichillis?
He is the director of music in the parish. He was the only person close when I made the statement.
Yes. And now I take it you have read your statement, Father?
I have.
Have you checked it?
Yes.
When last did you read it?
This morning.
And are there any changes you wish to make to it?
No.
Are you sure?
Sure.
And you confirm it's true and correct?
I do.
Your Honour, I tender a copy of Father Thomas's church curriculum vitae.
CV will be 28,114.
And I ask that that be put on the screen for the Father to be able to see it. Now, I take it, Father, that this is your curriculum vitae.
It is.
Do you recognise it?
I do.
What about the second Did you prepare this CV, Father?
I did.
It has a date received by fax 10 December 2015. I don't know if that assists you, but for what purpose did you prepare it?
I was contacted by the legal team for the Cardinal, who indicated to me that I think about the year 2002, about that time when that 60 Minutes program came out about matters concerning the Cardinal and the Ballarat questions, that when the Cardinal was visiting Melbourne, I think we were having a social event with some of the priests. I picked the Cardinal up from his sister's residence to take him to the social event we were having with the priests, and I made the comment to him that I'd seen the program of 60 Minutes, and that I said to him that I didn't recall that the reaction that was being reported there was what I remembered from that day. And apparently then he'd made a note about that, and so then just maybe 2 weeks ago, I got contacted by the legal team for the Cardinal asking if I was prepared to make a statement about my recollections around that time. And that's then when I prepared the statement.
Thank you for that, Father. I'm asking specifically about the CV. When did you prepare the CV, and for what purpose?
I prepared the CV last week.
Yes. And was that also for the purpose of this hearing or for some other purpose?
No, I prepared it specially.
Yes. Now, Father, you were at seminary at Corpus Christi College in Clayton, 1976 to 1982, is that right?
Yes.
When in 1982 did you complete your studies at the seminary?
I was ordained to the priesthood in 14th of August in 1982, and then the practice was, at that period, we remained in the seminary until the end of the year doing specialised courses and sort of field training, and so I would have actually left the seminary in November 1982.
Under the appointments in the Archdiocese of Melbourne, it says you were appointed in 1982 assistant priest in the parish of St Mary of the Angels in Geelong.
Yes, that was simply the practice then over the holidays. We were given a temporary appointment. We were normally sent to places where there was an influx of people over the holiday period. I was sent to Geelong, but my major work when in Geelong was as chaplain to the Geelong Hospital. So I did that work basically for 2 months until then the permanent full-time appointment was made in the January, to take effect in the January.
So that appointment in Geelong was after you'd finished at the seminary, is that right? So
Yes.
might it have been something like this? You finished at the seminary in November and did the Geelong... Father, I'm sorry, you and I have to be careful not to speak over each other because there's someone trying to capture what each of us is saying. I'm suggesting perhaps you finished at the seminary in November and then the appointment was December, January. Would that be right?
Yes.
And in that period, 1982 to 1992, you were assistant priest in 4 different parishes. Is that right?
Yes.
And then Bishop George Pell was installed as an auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Melbourne in March 1987. Do you recall that?
I do, yes.
And at that time, you were assistant priest in the parish of St Jude in Scoresby. Is that right?
St Gerard. Oh, no, 87. Sorry, yes, St Jude in Scoresby. That's right.
Yes. And St Gerard is in North Dandenong.
That's correct.
Yes. And Father, when did you first meet George Pell?
I think I first met him when he was the rector at Corpus Christi College. I wasn't a seminarian then, but I think at an event at the seminary, I met him and just met his acquaintance.
Was he the rector when you were there?
No.
So he was rector there, according to CV, January 1985 to April 1987. So just over 2 years. Are you able to place it within that period?
Pardon, sorry, I didn't hear.
Are you able to place it within that period?
Yes,
when he was
within that period that I would have met him at the seminary.
Yes, and more specifically within that period? Any time in particular, or you're not able to do that?
No, I can't.
Yes. And the circumstances, you say, was some or other function?
Often there were events at the seminary, whether it be the annual reunion of the priests, which often would be held at the seminary. I think it was just in that setting that I met the then Bishop, the then Father Pell.
Now, we know from your statement that you came to know Father, or perhaps then Bishop Pell, quite well. When is it that you first came to know him quite well?
When I was in the parish of St Gerard in North Dandenong, Bishop Pell was our regional bishop, so I would meet him in visitation. He had the practice of inviting priests of his zone, his area, to dinners, so to get to know them, because he wasn't a priest of Melbourne, and he sort of took every opportunity to get to know the clergy. So I came to know him better through then. We would often discuss matters theological, and then he started giving me some theological works, often to research for him, to do some backgrounding work, and then particularly when he became a member of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that particular period was a heavy period when documents like the Catechism of the Catholic Church were being prepared, and so I was given drafts of that to make comment on, to structure, see how it all hung together. So I did some commentary work for that. So through that work, that's how I got to know him.
Cardinal Pell was a member of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith from 1990 to 2000, a 10 or 11-year period. I take it that it was in the early part of that period when he was first appointed that you were assisting him in that?
Yes.
Yes. And that was prior to you being appointed assistant priest in the parish of St Patrick at Mentone?
Yes, that would have been the major work